Hello and welcome to episode 93 of Christians in Our Soup, a weekly podcast by two of God's peculiar people, about God's peculiar people, for God's peculiar people. Proving that life is simply not as black and white as some would have us believe, but that sometimes life gets real and doesn't fit into any boxes, no matter how hard we try. So hello everyone and welcome to this week's show. Now, coming up a little bit later in the show, I'll be catching up with an old friend of mine, Jez Young from Stopsley Baptist Church in Luton, about his journey of faith and the community garden centre that he's helped to set up. But before that, just a little bit of feedback from last week's show. So Adam Innes, thank you Adam for your feedback. Adam said, thanks Russ, really helpful to listen to how God has guided you recently. Well, bless you Adam for the encouragement, really appreciate that, and I pray that God will bless you this week. And don't forget, listeners, if you've got any feedback for the podcast, you can comment on the social media posts, of course. You can email the show at christiansinoursoup@hotmail.com. That's all one word, christiansinoursoup@hotmail.com. Or you can even head over to the website, which is podpage.com/christians-in-our-soup. That's podpage.com/christians-in-our-soup with all the hyphens. And hit that blue mic button to leave us your audio feedback. But for now, it's time to hear from a long-time friend of mine, and in fact the man who was also my best man a little over 28 years ago. So, Russ, would you please welcome to the podcast, Jez Young. Jez, welcome to Christians in Our Soup. Lovely to have you with us. Now, for our listeners, you and I have known each other for roughly how long, do you think? without giving our ages away.
30 years.
It's got to be at least that, hasn't it? I think we first met as youngsters at the Stopsley Baptist Church youth group, if memory serves. Yeah. So it's been quite a while. But with that in mind, Jez, first of all, if you can start off by telling us, were you born and raised in Luton? Where did all of that happen?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Luton. We used to go to a different church, and then in the 80s, we started to attend Stopsley Baptist Church.
Fantastic.
I was 15, 16 then, and that's really the starting point of my Christian faith.
Sure.
We've always gone to church,
yeah,
as a family, but then I realised there was something sort of different in these people, and the church we'd gone to was very traditional, and Stopsley was very enthusiastic at that time, and I think there was sort of a difference, and we went away on Boys Brigade camp and spring camp, and that's when I sort of open to Jesus coming into my life.
Fantastic. What are your memories of the camps?
Oh, I remember them being wet and good food and wet. But that's really where I sort of learned or got engaged in my water sports, which sort of part of my life. And I remember one in Dover when we did sailing and canoeing in the sea, and sort of through the Boys Brigade. That's sort of how I got my love for water sports.
Oh, fantastic! Is that something you still do now?
Yeah, I do it now, but I don't do as much.
Right.
And you'll find out why a bit later.
Right. Okay, I shall look forward to that. So with that in mind, I've just had a thought, because that sparked a memory in my own mind. Did you come with us, with the Boys Brigade, when Mr. R took us over to Bedford? We used to go over to Bedford from time to time with the canoes and canoe on the river there. And I remember an incident which has stuck with me for a long time. I don't know whether you were with us on this particular occasion, but we all had to go through the capsize drill before we were properly allowed to go off canoeing down the river on our own. And I remember Ian, Mr. Rowland's son, showing us how to do the capsize drill on this particular occasion. It was the first time I think I'd gone over to Bedford with the guys. and he capsized his canoe so quickly, and then didn't come up. And for about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, there was no sign of him. And I remember Mr. Rodens becoming more and more agitated on the side, waiting for his son to reappear. And after about 2 or 3 minutes, he eventually came up. And what had happened was that he capsized his canoe so quickly that he trapped a bubble of air. So he capsized, rolled out, come back up inside the canoe and stayed there until his air had run out, and then came out.
Oh, yeah, I remember going to Bedford with the canoes on the trailer in the old minibus.
The old minibus, there was a bone shaker to be trifled with, if I remember rightly. Tell us a bit more. I mean, you talked about the Boys Brigade and the camps and that sort of thing, but what was your childhood and your upbringing at home like? Oh,
very, very privileged, very nice. We used to go on lots of nice holidays.
Yep.
Yeah, it was nice. Sheltered from perhaps life experiences.
Yep. Is that something that you came to recognise as you got older, that perhaps you'd been maybe sheltered a little bit from certain experiences, or not?
Yeah, I think so. But as my life's gone on, I've sort of made those experiences. I've worked in a prison. I've done sort of things like that, where I've sort of had my eyes open perhaps a little bit more to what goes on than what I thought went on.
Yeah, sure. You said earlier on that as a family you always went to church. So in terms of your upbringing, you didn't really know any difference. But what was the first memory that you have of church?
I think the first memory of church was coming to Stopsley, and to, apart from the Sunday school sort of times that you've sort of had, sort of coming to Stopsley, and there's all these people in the school hall all worshipping, and you know, just the whole liveliness of it, that was something that I wasn't aware of before. And at that time there was Andy Hickford, the youth minister there, and you know, just sort of having so much things to do, and sort of in open and going to Sunday school and sort of learning all that stuff.
Sure.
But because I've been a Christian for a long time, some of that stuff now can become a bit boring. If you know,
Yeah.
There's only so many times you can know the Christmas story, for example.
Yeah.
And you know, and
Yeah.
I think sometimes I struggle with that now. That actually,
Yeah, sure.
some of these stories that we learn in Sunday school are a bit mundane now. You know,
Yes,
sometimes you have to really find the excitement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. You made mention of the school, so I'm guessing at the time that your family joined Stopsley Baptist, that we were meeting at Stopsley High School. So we'd obviously, at that point, we'd pretty much moved out of what is now the greenhouse, which was the old church building. So I guess then from there, it was moving into the new building at the appropriate time. What do you remember about the building project and the new building?
Well, that's the time that I was at Herne Bay Court. When they built the church, my parents were quite involved. My dad was treasurer then. My mum worked for the Stopsley project that was a part of the church at that point. And the move to the new building sort of happened while I was away.
Right, sure. Okay. You mentioned Herne Bay Court. We'll come back to that in a moment. But from moving from that space in your heart to becoming a regular churchgoer, to coming to faith in Christ, tell us how that journey evolved and when you actually made a commitment of faith to Christ.
Well, I actually made a commitment to faith sort of, 85, 86, which was from a church camp that I'd been on, and sort of heard the gospel for myself, and a lot of my friends at that point had made the commitment, but I hadn't at that camp. And it was a few months later, for some holidays after that, when I went and made that commitment, you know, with Andy Hickford, and we sort of had that chat and prayed that then in the summer. And then I got baptised when I was 18. I mean, I found school quite difficult. From school, I went to catering college, and that's the sort of time that I was on fire for Jesus. And, you know, we run youth clubs at the church and the Express Bar and all of those things that we did then. I was very involved in helping the homeless in Luton at that point with a with a friend of mine, and we'd go down to the day centre and we'd do a lot of work for them at that time. And that's sort of, you know, at that age, that time, I was sort of really on fire, and nothing would knock me off, you know, and I'd be freely talk to people about it.
Yeah.
And not let anyone, you know, I wouldn't worry about what anyone said about it. Sure. Or about me because of that at that sort of time.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, when you came to Herne Bay, you actually came as part of the kitchen team. But what actually brought you to Herne Bay Court?
Well, I needed, that was my last, I think I came the middle year of a 2-year course at Catering College where I needed 6 weeks work experience. And I think you sort of told me there was a summer job going, and that's sort of how I got there. And then at the end of the time, I returned and did my second year at Catering College, and then I came back and stayed for the summer, and then they kept me on after that time. And that's sort of how I got there, really. Yeah.
What are some of your memories of your time at Herne Bay? We'll come on to perhaps the most specific one later on, but what are some of your memories?
I think it always used to be hot there in the summer, didn't it?
Yes.
It always used to be nice and warm.
If memory serves, Vic was very keen on saying that Herne Bay regularly held the sunshine hours record for Kent. So.
Yeah, and I think that was the time where I sort of grew up. I never went to university at that time, and I think Herne Bay Court taught me a lot of things about growing up. I had to then start washing, for example. I had to then start managing my own money. I had to work out, you know, emotions and all of those things. And I think that was all a sort of a big time of sort of growing up, going to find my own church there and seeing where I fitted in with a team of people that you work and live with. And, you know, I think that time sort of taught me a lot. And I was there as a bit of a yo-yo because I went from there to a year out at Birmingham City Mission, and then I came back, and just different things. I sort of always yo-yoed back to Herne Bay Court at that time.
Sure. One of the things that you became involved in at Herne Bay, you talked about finding a church and that sort of thing. You settled at the church that Anne and I were going to, Beltinge Baptist Church. And one of the things that I remember, and strange enough, Anne and I were talking about this the other day actually, one of the things that you instigated there as one of the youth leaders there was the non-alcoholic cocktail bar. Do you remember much about that?
Yeah, I do. I remember some things about it. Yeah, I mean, we were trying to reach out to the young people of that community at that time.
Yeah.
And Beltinge is and was a very small church with not many young people, very traditional. And we were sort of trying to reach out to sort of new people there and trying to get younger people into the church.
Yeah. Do you remember the interview that we did with, I think it was BBC Radio Kent?
Yeah, I didn't come, did I? I listened to it.
Were you not there for that at the church?
No.
Was that me and Lorraine?
Yeah.
Because the one thing that sticks in my mind about that, and again I was saying to Anne about it the other day, the one thing that sticks in my mind is the fact that they refused to let us actually pour the drinks live on air. They did the interview live, and they refused to let us pour the drinks. So we had to pre-pour all the cocktails that we were going to talk about, and then to simulate the sound of pouring the drinks, we had a jug of water and an empty glass. So why they wouldn't let us pour the drinks, but they would let us pour a glass of water, I never quite worked out. But yeah, I remember that and being on BBC Radio Kent. So yeah, much fun there. But your time at Herne Bay, you talked about it being a time of growing up. Was it also a time maybe of growing in your faith? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think it was. And just sort of trying new things at new different churches that we went to. I sort of used to lead services at Beltinge and sort of things like that, and sort of getting involved in a smaller church where I'd previously been to big churches and perhaps not very much involved. That Beltinge, being a small church, let me be involved more.
Yeah.
And they were keen that, you know, there was sort of these young people from Herne Bay Court that wanted to come in and sort of be involved. And we did a little bit of preaching there and different things, ran some services. And
you did a little drama there as well. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we did a little drama there. I hadn't been there very long, and you managed to throw something in my face quite quickly.
Yeah, yeah, I'd forgotten that. And I mean, you played the part of the guy who rejected God, but do you remember Alan and Alex and the parts that they played?
No, I don't remember that.
Now, the reason I remember this is because I still have the recording of it, and I was listening to it about a week or 10 days ago, strangely enough. And Alan and Alex Rouse played the parts of the sort of Mr. and Mrs. Mop. They were the flat cleaners, and they come in and discover your body after you've died. And I can see him saying it because the recording reminds me to see him, of Alan walking in and putting on the most incredible effeminate voice and turning to Alex and going, "Oh, look what we found here," and the entire congregation falling about laughing, which was but it was a great piece of drama. That was one of the things I actually remember you being involved in.
Being good at.
Yeah, very good, mate, very good. Now, Herne Bay Court also led you to a very significant meeting that would shape the rest of your life. Tell us a bit about that.
Oh yeah, well, I started going out with Julie at that time, and we got married there in '96. So it means this year we've been married 25 years.
Wow.
So so that started married life together, and we were there about a year after we got married, and we moved after that. So
was that something that you expected? Had you gone looking for a life partner when you were at Herne Bay?
No, when I sort of went, I wasn't really sure what was going to happen, really. It was, I wasn't really sure where my life was going to go after catering college. And, I'd gone to BCM for a year because I was sort of testing the water to sort of see if that was the right place for me to go to, or for me to get into that line of work. So I wasn't really sure what we left to go and work in a hotel in Norfolk.
Right.
As an assistant management couple, and we were there about 6 months, and decided it was sort of time to move on.
Okay.
So that was sort of our step from there, really.
Sure. Just step back a bit. You've mentioned Birmingham City Mission on 2 or 3 occasions up to now. Tell us about the time that you had up there and what that involved and what you did there.
I spent a year on their year out course, doing lots of different things. We were working with a local church just off the centre of Birmingham, and we would help them, support them. We'd do a lot of door-to-door. We ran a children's club, and then we went and did a lot of evangelism on the streets in Birmingham, and we would work with the homeless there again, and we would do the soup kitchen, and we'd go out on their Christian bus that they had, and do sort of different things in the different suburbs of Birmingham.
Now, you've mentioned briefly that yourself and Julie moved to a hotel in Norfolk for 6 months, but eventually you finish up back in Luton, and in fact back at Stopsley Baptist. Was that always the plan, or how did that journey come about?
Well, after Norfolk, we then went to Scotland for 3 months.
Oh, wow.
To work. Herne Bay Court had then become part of a chain of Christian conference centres, and we went up to the one in Scotland, Gartmore House, and we worked there for 3 months. This was sort of a bit of a time in our life where we sort of didn't really know what we were doing, where God wanted us, really.
Yeah.
And that came to an end after 3 months. It was only a short contract, and then we returned back to Luton. And had to live at my parents' and put our stuff in storage because we sort of didn't have anywhere to live. Right. And we lived with my parents sort of for 3 or 4 months, I think it was, in the end. And I got a temporary job working for Luton NHS, helping people get back to work that had mental illness. And I did that, and that was only a temporary contract. And then that became a full-time job. And I was there 5 years, but that got me into teaching. They put me through some adult education teaching qualifications, so I could then train these people to get back to work. And I really felt, God had sort of guided us to that point.
Sure.
Julie had got a job working for After Schools Club. We then attended Stopsley, and we managed to get enough money to rent a flat, and that sort of worked out well, and we sort of felt that God had sort of got our hands on our lives at that point.
Sure. What did it feel like for you particularly? I mean, for Julie, obviously it was almost a completely new venture, I guess, but for you particularly, having been away from Stopsley for as long as you had, what did it feel like to be back?
Well, it felt, we only ever thought that it was only going to be a temporary thing. Julie had really got her heart set on moving back to Kent, where her parents live.
Right.
And we'd sort of investigated a few possibilities down there, but nothing really had come of it. So, I mean, we got involved in the church. We got involved in the church quite heavily here, and we'd sort of been involved in different things. And, you know, it seemed okay. It sort of seemed that that's what we were doing at that sort of time, and sort of felt that was right.
Sure. We talked a couple of months ago when we were initially talking about setting up the interview for today's show, and you made mention of rediscovering your faith. Tell us a little bit about that, because just the very phrase, and you use it yourself, the very phrase rediscover suggests that at some point you'd maybe lost or walked away or felt distant. What was that journey like for you?
Well, when we came back to Stopsley, we'd done this job for the NHS, and then I moved and I worked at a school in mainstream education, and I'd gone back to university part-time at night to work for a degree, and I reconnected with my canoeing and my love of water sports.
Right.
And sort of through that time, which was, I don't know, I sort of church just became a bit of a routine, really, you know, and if I could go canoeing on a Sunday, then I did. And we were growing up, our children were being born and growing up, and it all just become a bit of a routine. And it came to a point about 3 or 4 years ago where I was sort of driving in my car, and I just felt that God was saying, you know, you're worshipping the wrong God. You're worshipping the God of water sports, and you weren't worshipping me. And that sort of came at a critical point, because, you know, I could have become a high point in the canoe club. You know, at that point, I'd done a few challenges, and, you know, I'd sort of just gone through this time where canoeing sort of came first and not God. And it was this sort of moment that I sort of stopped. And after that time, I sort of, you know, started putting God first. If there was a canoe paddle on a Sunday, then I'd really consider where I should be and what I should be doing. And that time was quite difficult, because I lost a friend to suicide through that time, and just different things sort of just happened. I'd applied for a job that I thought I was definitely going to get, and I didn't. And, you know, it sort of just sort of came to a sort of a real point that actually I was just putting my, doing things in my own work, and not doing things with God.
Sure.
And that sort of changed the way that I look at things now, and the way that things have happened.
Yeah, sure. And what difference has it made for your day-to-day life that you've rediscovered your faith, and that the emphasis in your life has returned to your faith in Christ?
Well, the energy that I used to put into other things, I now put into church stuff.
Yeah.
And the energy, the hours that I would just spend working, because that's what I was doing. I was worshipping God and worshipping work, and sort of just made me sort of put all that stuff into sort of church things, and just looking at life differently, you know, and and not trying to have the best canoe stuff, you know, and the best things, you know. That's a God that was sort of taking my money away from where it should be, and taking my priorities away.
And since that, you've actually been able to get involved in a very specific project at Stopsley Baptist Church, the community garden. Now, my memories of the site where the community garden, I believe now is that it once used to be an old terrapin hut that was the Stopsley Day Centre. But Stopsley Baptist Church has found a very different use for it, and the community garden is a project that you've had a major hand in. How did that come about? How did that all start?
Well, I sort of want to do things for the community and sort of want to bring the community together. And with a group of friends, there was this bit of wasteland, and it was overgrown, and we were sort of discussing what we could do with it. And one idea was that we could sort of turn it into a community garden. And that's what we've done, or that's what we're doing. And what we've done is they'd sent a questionnaire out to thousands of places in Stopsley and Puttridge about what the community wanted. And the community wanted a place that they could call their own that would bring the community together. And so we said that we would sort of try this land into a community garden. We were never sure that it would really take off. We were sort of just dabbling, and what's happened is it's become this place where the community love, where things grow that we'd be very surprised to grow. And over since the 18th of June, it's been last year, it's been open for the public. We've been working on the site since November. Before that, clearing it. We've got a nice veg area. We've got a nice seating area. We've now got a remembrance area, and then down the back of it, we're now developing that into a sort of a family area. And we hear stories through our Facebook page where people just come to this garden and sit there and find peace. We've got a prayer tree where people write prayers on and hand them on there. We've got children's activities and children's trails that we've been running through lockdown. This weekend we did a sunflower growing activity for the children, and we just have lots of people come into the garden each day, sit on their benches. It's been an ideal place through these lockdowns for people to meet up on their daily work and just find peace. And we've got some Christian books in there. We had a big cross up there for a month over Easter.
Yeah.
And we've had a Christmas tree, and just subtly giving out the gospel and what we believe. I mean, we've had to make some tough decisions about it. We turned down a big grant from the National Lottery because we didn't feel that was right to have.
Yep.
It's been a good ride, but it's been up and down, and it's been really good.
Sure. You say you turned down a grant from the National Lottery. Did they actually approach you and say, we understand what you've done, we'd like to help?
Well, we were working with a company, or a charity which wanted to do some work with us, which wanted to sort of join up with us, become our partners, and they were supported. The money they'd got to do this came from the National Lottery. Okay. But we had this discussion that, the ethics about the lottery and whether it was right or wrong, and we decided that it didn't sit comfortable with us. So
absolutely.
We had to say that that's not what we wanted. We don't put our faith in money or trying to win a better life. Yeah. We've got a better life that we want to give people for free.
Amen. Fantastic. What about sort of local press or media? Have they got behind the project? Have they been able to get involved in any way to help publicity-wise or not?
No, not really. We do a lot of publicity on Facebook. We've got a team that share it on lots of different pages on Facebook. We've got a good word of mouth. The local primary school keen to share stuff we've got on their social medias.
Brilliant.
We did a paving slab. We needed 70 odd paving slabs. We did buy a paving slab for £5 from the local community and raised £800.
Wow.
We'd come to a point where we were £100 short of this £800, and we'd been this £100 short for a couple of weeks. We'd got someone to lay them. We hadn't got that £100 that we needed. And one day we noticed the local estate agent had given to our page the £100 that we needed.
Wow.
So much of it so much of it sort of just comes together. Someone who had been off work, who had been ill for 6 months, grew loads of seeds last year for us. And, you know, we had the massive tomatoes from these seeds that he'd done. He'd never grown anything in his life before, you know, and someone that was off sick had grown these things. And then all this veg and fruit we were able to share with the community, you know, you know, it helped them, it helped the community, and it's sort of just gone really well.
That's fantastic. Now that you touched on that about the vegetables and the fruit and things, and you know, when you first mentioned the phrase community garden, I'm like, oh, you know, nice piece of grass, couple of benches, maybe a tree or two here and there for people to sit under, that sort of thing. For me personally, the last thing I would have expected, especially in what is basically an urban area, albeit an urban area on the outskirts of a town, would have been what amounts to almost an allotment patch. But the community garden actually grows its own vegetables and bits and pieces, and then is able to distribute those to the local community, isn't it?
Yeah, that's how it works. Yeah, we've got a free, well, we call it free plant veg table. So what we do is when we harvest something, like last year we were harvesting lots of beans and tomatoes, potatoes, carrots, we'd put them on the table, we'd put a Facebook post out, you know, and the stuff would be gone, you know.
Wow.
Just because people would just come and get it, just want to come and get it.
Yeah. Is the garden itself, is it a staffed area? Do you actually have people that sort of man the garden to be able to talk and chat and pray with people when they come in?
Well, sometimes and sometimes not. Sometimes there's people from the church that are there, but it's not a formal arrangement. We sometimes Messy Church use it to give out bags, and sometimes they have people there when they're giving out bags and things. But you know, there's often people there to talk to people. But it's not a formal arrangement.
No, sure. How do you see the whole community garden thing moving forward? You've said that, you know, the community appear to have got behind this, and a lot of folk are coming in. Word of mouth has been fantastic in terms of the support that the community has given. How do you see that ministry progressing?
Well, hopefully, the greenhouse building which you spoke about earlier.
Indeed, yeah.
There's been some changes there, and hopefully that's going to become a community hub.
Wow, brilliant.
Hopefully the community hub will build on the garden. So at the moment, the community hub is being tidied and rubbish is getting rid of it there, and the people that are there are moving up to the main building of the church. And hopefully that's going to sort of become a community hub. It may have a cafe there. It may be available for people to rent out rooms for offices or for the community to rent out rooms like a village hall kind of thing. Yeah. This survey, which we spoke about earlier, sort of talked about the community wanting somewhere where they could rent out. You know, Stocksey hasn't got a village hall. So maybe that. I mean, we've got links with the Sportsman pub, which is in the village, and before we did the community garden, we were doing community quizzes there at the Sportsman.
Oh wow!
On a Monday night once a month before lockdown, and encouraging church people to sort of come and help this pub that had got a very interesting pass.
Yes,
and trying to break down the barriers between the church and the pub, just as that sort of community feel that if you live in a village, which Stocksley is a village, that people would go to the pub, people would go to the church. And now we've sort of introduced this garden into this mix as well. I mean, the pub, when we did the paved area, we hadn't got any chairs, any seating, so we asked the pub if we could borrow their picnic tables for 2 weeks.
Right.
We, due to lockdown, we managed to keep it for 6 months. So the pub's been very good to us and helped out. And we've sort of been trying to work that connection together.
Yeah.
And one Easter Sunday a few years ago, we prayed outside the Sportsman just as it was about to reopen after a lot of work being done in there. And I introduced myself to the landlord and gave him this card, and we sort of said, you know, we're praying for there. And he said, well, that's the only way, this pub's going to survive, will be on prayer.
Wow.
And, and ever since, landlords have come and gone, but we've always tried to work with them and try to keep that relationship with the church and the pub.
You've talked a couple of occasions in terms of the community garden and lockdown. Did you find that during lockdowns particularly, people would take their daily exercise walk and come to the garden?
Yeah, that worked really well. I mean, I think one of the successes of the garden has been because of lockdown. I think, I think it may not have been as popular if it wasn't sort of for lockdown really. And I think that sort of helped. And as we opened 18th of June last year, we sort of, that was just as lockdown was sort of reopening for the first time.
Yeah.
And that sort of helped us as well. And we, it's a good way for the community to engage together and with the church. I mean, the garden's been the only bit of the church that's been open for this time.
Sure.
So, people have been coming to the garden, have been coming into the church, as it were.
Yeah. Fantastic. How can local people find out, how can anyone who wants to support the ministry, wherever they may be listening, how can anyone who wants to support the ministry or find out more about it, how can they find out about it? Where would they go to find out more about it?
Well, the best place is to look on Facebook, Stopsley Community Garden on Facebook. That has got our whole story. Facebook's great for putting photos up and looking back on the whole story, and that's got the whole story there on Facebook from when we opened on the 18th of June to where we are now, and that sort of shows the progress and where we've come. And there's reviews on there from visitors, and there's sort of lots of information there as well, and that's where we post a lot of our stuff, our activities and what's going on and how to volunteer and all of that. But if you want to send an email because you want to be involved in another way, well, that's community@stopsley.net, and that'll come to me, and that and we can chat about that and how the best way to be involved in that as well.
Fantastic. And what I'll do, if I may, is if you could just pop an email across to me at some point with the direct link to the Facebook page and the contact email. Listeners, I'll make sure that goes into the show notes so that when the show goes out, those contact details will appear then in the show notes as well for folk to be able to get in touch and support if they can. Jez, we're almost time to wrap up, but just one final question for yourself personally. We've talked a lot about your journey of faith, the ministries that you've been involved in. How do you see that journey of faith and the ministry that God has for you moving forward?
Well, a good question, really. I think I've come through lockdown sort of thinking there's something better for me, but I can never really work that out. As we were saying before, you know, and sort of, I'm not really sure on what the next step is, really. You know, we've done, I love the community. I think people should be involved in the community of where they live, but it's how you do that. And, at a time where funding or a time where money is shorter in organisations, how can we do that? I mean, we did a big Easter egg drop recently at Easter, obviously, and we've done lots of things like that, and Valentine's cards we did in the community. And it's how, I think, we've got neighbours wherever we live, and it's how we can interact with them as Christians, and how we can be a light in our community. At Stopsley, we call sort of house groups beacons, and beacons should be a beacon is a light. Yeah. A light in the community, and how can each of us be a light in the community we live, whether that's wherever we're listening to this, and I think that's a challenge. And this garden is a beacon, is a light in the community.
Fantastic. Yeah, Jez, I have to say it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, we spent, I think, about 40 minutes catching up before we started recording, and it was great to catch up on various things in terms of our recent past. But it's been a pleasure to just catch up on bits of your journey some of which I've been involved in and other bits I haven't been. So to fill in the gaps for me personally, it's been an absolute pleasure. But also for our listeners, just to see that journey of faith that God has taken you on, the way that God has developed your faith, grown your faith over that time, and has used you in various different ministries. And from chefing at a Christian conference centre to vegetable gardens in the middle of a village there, and a number of things in between as well. God has used you in some amazing ways, and bless you for being open to his leading. And our prayers go with you, that whatever that future holds, whether it's being a beacon to your next door neighbours or whatever God has for you, that you'll know his blessing and his peace as a family, and for yourselves, as you move forward in his ministry. Brother, it's been an absolute blessing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. And if you're willing, and ministries move on and change, and faith grows and develops and changes again, maybe we'll have you back at some point in the future to see where your journey has taken you, or where God has taken you rather, on that journey. But for the moment, Jez Young, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
And I just want to say it was an absolute pleasure to catch up with Jez and hear all about his journey of faith, and especially the community garden at Stopsley. Jez, God bless you and that community garden project. And listeners, if you want to find out more, then the links that Jez mentioned earlier on in the show, they'll be in this week's show notes. But that's all for this week. As always, my thanks for listening, and please do share the show on your own social media feeds and with your churches, your friends and your